You want to do a quick test screen share just to
All right,
give it a whirl before we.
let's see what crazy pictures I've got going on here.
I wanted the heel that you showed me when we were doing the pregame was really haunting my dreams with
Oh, was it?
the ring cut out around it. I've been wondering about that one. Do you know what the one I'm talking about?
I do. I just got to figure out how to get there.
Uh,
Let's see here. Uh, you're seeing all this stuff now, so
yep.
Okay, hang tight. This one?
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
All right.
That's crazy.
Prairie State. This is the neck reset of my biggest nightmare.
Is that like
I don't think I've ever spent longer doing a neck reset than this dumb thing.
is that like a one of those bent over nails for like making sure that your electrical is properly stapled to a 2x4? Like
No, it is not. Do I have a picture of the thing? That guitar is at the store, not here at my house, but basically, hang on. You see this metal bar right here?
yeah.
So this metal bar attaches to this right here. It's a rod, and it threads to this end pin, and it goes through the instrument and pops out of this sound, this little hole right here, around the heel, and then goes back into the block right here. And so it's sort of like a coat hanger that's straightened out, except that it's 3/16 of an inch thick. And so you got to do the neck reset, but you have to keep this silly channel here lined up with that hole.
Yeah.
But you have to change the neck angle.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of silly shimming involved. And always with a Larson, you have to take the heel cap off because their binding is so rounded. It kind of overhangs down here. You see my mouth?
Yeah.
It overhangs.
You'd pop it off anyway, trying to push it out.
Well, you could pop it off, or if it doesn't come off, you just take it off, and then you do all the work. And then the last thing you ever do in one of these Larson neck sets is you put the heel cap back on. So it's long and involved. And of course, like can't really see it, but the dovetail is short, like the body joint's about, 3/16 of an inch past the dovetail. It's just like the whole thing is really silly. And the, where's another picture?
That bar was designed to stop the need for neck resets, right?
Well, it was designed. I think they just kind of discovered some interesting drugs when they were making this guitar. To be honest with you, because it's like the whole principle of coordinator rods in a banjo, right? This thing is from the late 20s where banjos were everywhere, and so they're like, well, that's how we stop a banjo from caving in. Maybe we should build a guitar like this. And then they also put like a zillion braces and they laminated them, and like it's the most overbuilt guitar in the world, and it's skinny, like it's like 3 inches deep. So like this guitar wasn't moving, but somehow it did develop the need for a neck reset. I mean, despite all their efforts. But yeah, they are just, oh yeah. And when you're doing everything on this guitar, if you guys are ever lucky enough to work on one, this big tube right here, this tube is basically glued into the tail block and glued into the head block. And there's no way to remove it without destroying the guitar or cutting it, right? And people pay a lot of money for these guitars with this stupid metal in them. So you don't want to be cutting it. And then, so you have to do everything working around this dumb 3/8 inch tube that's in your way in the middle of the sound hole. So if you have to reglue the bridge, for example, or you have to glue a brace, or you have to glue your fretboard back on with this metal tube in the way, the whole thing is just such a disaster. So you can see it in this picture. I guess you can't see it, but I had to make some special calls each side individually because you can't put one clamp down the middle, and you can't put one call in there. There's calls to the left of the steel tube and then calls to the right of the steel tube. And you just got to make everything fit. Ditto with gluing this bridge that was loose. I normally put bolts when I'm gluing a bridge, but there was no way to put bolts because I couldn't get my hand in there to tighten the bolts. And so I basically just built this very low tech thing that kept the bridge from slipping forward. And this indexed in the holes and just was able to glue the bridge there. Thankfully, this bridge wasn't loose; it wasn't pushing forward. If I had to deal with it absolutely off, I don't know what I would have done. It would have been another full day of designing jigs to glue it on. Also, because this surface of the bridge isn't flat, it's not parallel with the top. So anytime you put clamping pressure on it, it just wants to squirm forward. It's just awful. This is terrible thing.
Just out of curiosity, and not to be too gauche, but after I see all these custom clamped scenarios, I'm like, what are these going for now? It's been some time since I've
this guitar is probably worth, it's a triple O size 12 fret and it's rosewood and it's pretty straight. So it's probably like a $15,000 or $18,000 guitar. I don't know what it's worth now. I've never actually sold a Prairie State with a metal tube in it, but the equivalent Larson would be $12,000, like just like a Stahl or a Maurer branded one without the metal in it. But people pay a lot of extra money for that silly metal.
I didn't know that.
There's that silliness. All right, how do I come back to the big thing here?
What is the hole in the heel? Is that part of their manufacturing process, or
this hole right here?
Yeah,
like this down here.
Was the heel cap indexed into it or something, or
No,
what?
so it wasn't. So you can see the very top of a screw poking out right there.
Yeah.
So this is a screw that's invisible from the front of the guitar that goes through the neck. And my suspicion is that this was I'm not really sure why they did this, but it might have something to do with the fact that they've removed all of this mahogany from the heel.
Yeah.
And worried that they needed to add some more structural integrity to it or some bizarre, ill thought out plan. But I didn't even know that was in there until I popped the heel cap off. Like there's no indication that there's metal in that neck whatsoever.
So it's under the fingerboard going down then?
Yeah, it starts under the fingerboard. So I suspect if you took the board off, you'd see the top of the screw, but I didn't take the board off, so I never discovered it.
Hey, Mark, what year is that guitar, if you don't mind me asking?
I think it's around 1927, 28.
Nice.
Around there. Yeah, I've just finished it up, so it's at the store.
So I'll make sure that if I get one, I know where it's going because I really don't want to touch that.
I got all the
balls made for it. I've had it.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah. Who am I talking to?
It's Nicole. I was just wondering, I came in late, so I apologize, but is that something, did you try finding it with a magnet to see if they're checking if there's any metal in there?
No. I mean, I like, this is not something that you normally would check,
If I see something weird like that, I throw a magnet on the neck just to make sure, because I mean, that's one way to avoid the surprise of it, right? You're just you know that there's something in there. Yeah.
That's right.
Mark, you've x-rayed a few guitars before, right? Can you x-ray? Yeah, if I remember.
I have a friend who's a vet surgeon who he's a guitar junkie and he's a vet surgeon and he owns his own practice. So no one's stopping him from x-raying guitars. So whenever I have an oddball guitar to take the neck off of, I will x-ray it first. So anytime there's a Gretsch from the 50s in front of me, I'll get it x-rayed. Or I x-rayed a Mossman because it has a totally bizarre neck joint, or it's one of two various totally bizarre neck joints, and I had to figure out which one it was. This one, I mean, I knew what a Larson neck joint was about because I've reset a number of these, and the only thing that was weird about this one was this silly metal thing that easily came out. So I wasn't expecting this weird piece of screw down the middle of this neck, but it also wasn't causing any grief. It wasn't hurting anybody being in there, so I was okay to keep going.
Yeah, by the way, like dentists also love to use their x-ray machines. Like they love as you can imagine, if you had one of those, you would love to x-ray stuff, like it's like, you got the thing, you got to use it, especially now that film is digital too. I imagine it just doesn't cost much to
it costs them actually nothing. I mean, it's only the cost of the machine and the outlay in the first place, right?
Yeah.
I'm just seeing if there's another one that I've x-rayed here that I can show you. I'm just scrolling down my files here. I don't know.
Yeah, the reason why I
Well,
mentioned I remember I
That
saw early
Mossman's it.
pictures.
There, here's the Mossman. So how can I show you this here? So on this Mossman, you can see the neck joint going on here. So this here is the cutout of the in the body, right there and right there. So it's sort of got this, it's like a V-shaped mortise and tenon is what's going on. And then these bolts are here, and these tightening these bolts pulls the neck towards the sound hole, right? But there's all sorts of gap in there. You can see this is before I took it out. Look at the amount of gap is there. There's no glue joint whatsoever, right? But they did their best to make it difficult anyways, and they filled it full of tight bond, and it's just a bloody mess full of glue in there. And then you pull these two bolts in there to tighten it. So it's the bolts basically hold it in place while that tight bond is drying. And then to get it out, you still have to steam it because this is all glue joint here. But I didn't know where on earth to put my steam needle when I was doing that, or heat stick or whatever you're using.
Yeah, I was going to say that must have been tricky just without doing that process. Like, even where are you even going to place the aircraft bit or whatever bit you're going to use without hitting?
Yeah. So the bonus is
having an aardvark of holes.
Yeah. So what I just simply did is I just measured this distance right here. I took out this fret, measured the distance on the X-ray versus this distance. I did a little quick, proportion math, figured out that this was whatever it is, let's call it 100 or let's call it like 15 millimeters or something. And then I just drilled the hole and bang, it was right there.
Nice.
And so ultimately it came out no problem. But without having that X-ray, without having these, well, that one doesn't help, without having these pictures to show me exactly where stuff was, there's just no way that I would have got it right in the first place. And I could have done a lot of damage to this guitar. So find yourself a friend with an X-ray machine is the long story of it, for sure. It's been super helpful to have. I'm seeing if there's another interesting one here. I don't know. It's taken me forever to find him. I'm not going to bore you looking through all my weird pictures of guitars.
No, it's all right. We can look at pictures, but I did want to start talking about the popsicle brace as we kind of were going at. And I was wondering if you could just maybe start off with like maybe a little synopsis of what your presentation with TJ was at Fretboard Summit.
Yeah,
just
sure.
Kind of.
I'm going to just take myself off of screen sharing here.
Yeah.
For a second. I think I just pressed stop. So let's see. There we are. All right, perfect. All right. So yeah, so this little invitation to chat with you guys, I guess, was born out of the Fretboard Summit that happened in August in Chicago. And I've been to, there's been 4 Fretboard Summits. That was the 4th, I guess. And I've been to all of them. I'm good friends with Jason Verlinde. It sort of grew out of all this Fretboard Journal stuff. And so I make sure that I bug him enough to let me come to these summits and do some sort of presentation. So this year, I'm also good friends with TJ Thompson. And every year TJ does a talk at the summit. And they're sometimes, they're always kind of out there a little bit. TJ kind of, he swings his pendulum in a very distinct direction every time he's talking to people about guitar repair, and his whole MO is to basically help people not burn out, not make themselves sick, work-life balance, all this sort of stuff. And he's very zen about guitar repair. He's very meditative about everything, and he does interesting stuff like talk to the guitar before he takes it apart, and he has a conversation with it and stuff. And by a lot of measures, people will call it flaky, but it's, for some reason, he can get away with it. Anyways, the last few chats, he's done all this sort of talking like that. And my feeling is that he's such a wealth of information with vintage guitars, particularly vintage Martin guitars. People aren't getting that side of his brain at these talks. And I really wanted to sort of do a talk with TJ where I was in the driver's seat, or we were in the driver's seat together, and sort of direct the conversation to the sort of more esoteric, weird stuff that you think about a lot when you're doing guitar repair, particularly at the level that he's working on guitars that are $50,000 to $250,000. You know, it's a different kind of thought process. Anyways, so we did this whole talk about weird and wonderful oddities and guitars and vintage guitars and what makes them tick, and also just things that we think are I don't know, problems that guitars have that were maybe a little too precious about a guitar to choose to accept and try to fix. Vintage guitars have lots of idiosyncrasies. The instruments that he specializes on and that I try to specialize on are from the dawn of the steel string guitar, where these companies were all trying to figure out how to build a guitar properly for steel strings. And they took a lot of swings and they missed a lot of shots. And but a few of the swings that they took that they thought were misses actually ended up being total home runs. And that's where the sweet spot of this early 30s steel string guitar happens. These guitars were built really too lightly for steel strings. And so a lot of them have suffered great damage over the years. But because they were so built in such a way, they sounded incredible. But their manufacturers, Gibson and Martin, they're manufacturers, and they couldn't have guitars coming back and breaking. And so they gradually made them heavier and heavier and heavier until they were fine, or mostly fine. But today they're worth a lot of money, and we love them for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is that they have a particular sound, and they sound unlike anything that else that followed. But there's a lot of lore and mythology around guitars that's widely spread on the internet. And there's lots of sort of false truths that are out there that TJ and I both feel need a bit of dispelling. And so that's how this conversation came to be about the popsicle braces in vintage guitars and everything that surrounds those. Is that a good enough synopsis there, Ian?
Yeah, it is. And I think that, you know, where to start. So kind of some of the myths and stuff that have gone around these guitars. What's interesting to me is it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of actual science done, you know, stress testing guitars, old guitars with popsicle braces, without them, with rosewood bridge plates, maple bridge plates, you know, like it. For one, I don't think you can, you know, destroy the guitars in order to, you know, test them correctly, which kind of precludes you from doing that. But then it seems like that opens the door for a lot of people with, you know, strong opinions that have, you know, maybe a little bit of experience, but no real data to back up their experience. And so that popsicle brace one was one that was running around when I was young. I remember guys asking me when I was just really getting started, hey, can you take the popsicle brace out of this? And my first question was why? And you know, those clicks that those guys run in, they get off to the races with ideas, and then next thing you know, it's like gospel truth, and you're just kind of like up against a culture of weirdos that want to do weird stuff to their guitars for reasons that aren't clear. I guess now I'm holding forth on this subject, but do you have any idea where the whole guitars sound better without popsicle braces, other than just, you know, lighter guitars sound better? I assume is the reasoning. Was there anything?
Yeah, I'm going to show you. Hang on a second. Let me just go back to this thing here, and go to not that picture. This one? Nope, not that picture. Here it is. This picture. So here is a guitar from, as you can see down here in the out of focus land, this is a style 45. This is a 0045 from 1939. And you can see here that there is no popsicle brace. So for those of you who are saying, what the heck is a popsicle brace? We're talking about the brace that happens right here. Wide flat brace between the neck block and that upper sound hole brace. So Martin guitars, many Martin guitars, when they were 12 frets, all had that popsicle brace in them. And then when Martin switched to 14 fret, I guess their rationale was that there's much less space here between this upper sound hole brace and the neck block. They didn't need to add extra reinforcement here. And to a large extent, they were right. But they also knew how to build a guitar, and they also knew how to prepare their wood in such a way that it was nice and dry and hard and they chose the best sort of top wood. And they still discuss. They still frequently have problems without this popsicle brace. You can see this guitar has a little crack over here, and most most old guitars have a crack here, whether or not you know it. It's usually there, and you usually still do have to fix it. But the bigger problem, this is why people think popsicle braces are needless, because the most valuable Martin guitars in the world don't have them, long and short. So that's where that comes from. And without a popsicle brace, two things happen. So first off is that when those cracks happen along the edges of the fretboard, hang on. So much easier with a guitar. So when those cracks happen here and here, if you do not have a lot of bracing tying everything together, what often happens is that the whole fretboard will shift towards the bridge. And I'm sure most of you have seen terrible examples of that. I'm going to pull up here again. I'm going to go to this. No, not that. It's so hard to see these pictures that I've got selected here. I'll come back to all this stuff. Hang on a second. Not that. You see my whole presentation right here. No, I don't actually have that picture. One sec, I'm going to show you. I'm going to find it in here. I thought I saved it, but I didn't. This is going to be.
It's okay. We got plenty of time. So
here, this one.
The tectonic shift.
Right. So, so I'm sure most of you have had to deal with this in your careers at this point. So this guitar had a popsicle brace. It had all kinds of braces, but it was neglected and forgotten about and had spring tension on it. And so this is what ensues. So having a popsicle brace under these frets right over here will often help this not happen, or not happen as bad or as quickly. So that's number one. So that's one good reason to have a popsicle brace. But the other reason that you want to have a popsicle brace is that it really where is it? Let me find this. Where is this? Here it is. Is that with tension on a neck on a guitar that doesn't have a popsicle brace, that wasn't built by Martin, let's say it was built by Gibson, or was built by someone who wasn't paying very close attention to what happens in this part of the top, you can develop some real major structural problems on a flat top guitar as the whole neck block torques towards the bridge under string tension. And so by not putting one in a guitar, or better yet, by taking it out of the guitar, you are opening the door to this sort of deformation that you can clearly see in the glare of the light right here on this advanced jumbo. Now, sorry, did I go off of topic there on you?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Go ahead and just go in the direction that you feel.
Right.
So that's dipping forward. So the neck is pulling forward with the string tension, and then the fingerboard extension is like caving in that spot, kind of. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So no, not that one. Here's the inside of this guitar. And you can see here that if I zoom in, there's this upper face brace here, which was it might have been 1/4 of an inch wide. And then these two little sound hole braces, which are clearly flat sawn and very thin and largely quite useless. Now, if the top was a good piece of wood or thick enough, possibly this guitar would have been just fine without this upper face brace. But the problem with this guitar, and the reason that this stuff happened, is because this top was a piece of garbage, and it was sanded to within a well, let's say within a 32nd of its life. The top around here at the bridge area measured 125 thousandths of an inch, plus or minus.
Yeah.
But here, where you see this puckering happen, the top was sanded to about 75 thousandths. Almost half of it was sanded away. And that was done at the factory, right? Because Gibson glued their necks on and then did the finish work. And so somebody heavy-handed was sort of cleaning up glue squeeze out or cleaning something up, and just sanded too deep along the sides of the fretboard at the upper bows, and then they put finish over it and shipped it away. And so here's this guitar that's a $90,000 guitar today, and it couldn't handle medium strings. This picture is after I finished the reset. And you can see this is how tall the saddle is. So it's a full height saddle. And when I don't measure neck angles whenever I do it, I just eyeball neck angles and I always get it right. It's just the way I've always done it. And I always flex a guitar. Let me go back. I'm going to get out of screen share for a second. And so when I'm sighting a neck, this is going to look funny on this camera, but I have a way that I hold the guitar and I flex it while I'm looking down the fretboard at the bridge, and I can see how the whole body will deflect when I'm bending the neck that way. And this guitar, I could tell when I was fitting the neck, it didn't matter that without any flexion on the neck, my neck angle was perfect. It pointed exactly where I wanted. But as soon as I put some flex on the neck, I watched the whole thing flex down, and my line of my fretboard went, maybe to halfway down the bridge instead of near the top of the bridge. And I knew it was going to be a problem. But the situation with that guitar, I'm going to show you one other thing here. Let me go back to screen share again. I'm getting good at the screen share stuff. If I go to this one. So this whole guitar, this is where, this right here is how thick the heel was when I started. And that was the finished heel. The start, finish. That's a ton of heel. For those, like, I don't know what that works out to. It's over 1/8 of an inch that came off of this heel. And the problem is that the dovetail on a Gibson, the angle of the sides of the tail, of the male part of the dovetail, are very steep. And so if you remove a lot of heel, you get to this point where you're about to, like, your dovetail becomes like just the tip of a triangle. It's not strong enough. You can't expect that that's not going to break. You can't expect your neck joint to hold with having very little tail left. So you're limited by the design of the Gibson tail. I'm going to grab it's easier to show you this. Here's one. Hang on a second, guys. I'm going to stop the share again. All right, here I'm back again. So you can see here, see how narrow that is?
Yeah.
So imagine now, if this I haven't started working on yet, imagine if you take 1/8 of an inch off of this, how much of this dovetail is going to be left? Like next to nothing, right?
Yeah.
And so you're limited how far you can take this neck back simply by the shape of this dovetail. Now, after 1944, Gibson changed their dovetail design, and you can do much more stuff with it. But these earlier saw cut dovetails like this, they're very limiting in what you can actually do with them. And so that advanced jumbo, I got to a point where I just wasn't comfortable taking any more meat off the bottom of that heel, and that was as good as it can get. And so I glued the neck in. When I glued it in, the neck appeared overset, and when I strung it up, as you saw in that picture with that full height saddle, the action was 6 to 7 64ths after removing that much meat off the neck. It was crazy. And so what the heck, I can't. So, so I put lights on it. I lowered the saddle some and I put light gauge strings, and yeah, it was fine. I got it to 5 to 7 64ths with lights. But this is a bluegrasser. He wants to run mediums on his guitar. And what are you going to do? He shipped me his guitar from West Virginia, shipped it to Canada so I can work on it. And I don't want to ship him back a guitar to West Virginia with a neck set that was not enough of a neck set. Like, that's not cool. That's not why he sent it to me. And so to me, what was obvious in this guitar, once I measured it and I saw how the top was deflecting that way, was that the whole upper bout was just kind of torquing under string tension, and there was no winning this at all. So what the guitar needed was to be braced properly so that it would maintain its geometry under string tension. I'm going to go back to screen share here now for a second. And let's go back to this. Okay, so here is a J35 from the same year as that advanced jumbo. All right, so here is there's a Popsicle, and look at these big sound hole braces. By 1939, Gibson was well aware of the problems that happen when you underbuild a guitar, particularly around the sound hole. And so they were already switched. They had switched in the mid 30s to these big finger brace sound hole braces, and they started putting these Popsicle braces in. But the advanced jumbo was designed to be a Martin D28. They basically looked at a Martin D28 and said, okay, well, let's just copy this, which is why they're long scale, which is why they're rosewood, and which is why they didn't have a Popsicle brace and they had these flat sound hole braces, because that's how Martin was built. They also scalloped the braces just like a Martin in the inside. They just kept the X brace kind of wide, so that's why it still sounds a bit like a Gibson. Otherwise, it would sound like an Indian rosewood Martin guitar, and so they just got it wrong. It worked for Martin because Martin didn't sand the tops of their guitar by 50 thousandths of an inch before finishing them, right? You measure Martin guitar up here. If it measures 125 at the bridge, it probably also measures 125 by the fretboard extension. So they didn't have the problems to this extent that Gibson had. But Gibson was Gibson, and so you can't throw a Martin blueprint on a Gibson made by Gibson employees and expect it to be a Martin. It just won't work. And so that's why this problem happened. So what I decided to do for this guitar was to make a transverse brace. And so this is the transverse brace, and there's a bit of technology in it. You can see it's thicker in the middle than it is on the ends. I put extra radius up here in the top to sort of push the fretboard up. So normally when you build a guitar, even if your radius at the bridge is 15-foot radius, usually under the fretboard, you're much flatter, like 28 or 40 or something. In this case, I radiused this thing to 15 feet also, so that I could put a lot of extra sort of cant in underneath the fretboard here. And then
is that to get a head start on the torque, or is that to get your fingerboard extension back up into the
no,
playing position?
That's to do both. It's to be extra strong and to push things up, and to help push it up. So there's another picture of it. You can see the taper on it. But when you looked inside the guitar, you couldn't see that was going on, because I did all that radiusing on the underside, and this was the saw cut side. I have a crappy saw blade that I keep to do these like terrible saw kerf marks for replacement braces. It's good to have a junky table saw blade around, like flea market table saw blade to do that with. And then this is how it got glued on. So this was a flat piece of plywood, and the radius is on top, and so it kept it flat on one side and then pushed the brace up as I clamped it. And that's what it looks like when it's done. Yeah, if you're looking at it, you know what you're looking at. It's not identical to Gibson. I use torrefied brace stock, so it looks a bit more similar. But I mean, if you look at it closely, it doesn't look exactly like Gibson, but it does blend in pretty nicely. And anyway, so just doing this and not doing the sound hole braces was enough to get me to have my action be 5 to 7 with medium strings, where it was 5 to 7 with light strings, which was a huge help. And I left it at that. The client is very happy with it as it sits. There is enough saddle left. If I wanted to have that super full height saddle, the next thing to do would have been to take out these sound hole braces and replace them with something more beefy, essentially, and radius as well.
Mark, just really quickly, at the summit, you talked about maybe fixturing the guitar to kind of like take the? Did you put it in a fixture to like bend the guitar in the opposite direction when you were?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't say that here, but you can see what's going on here. There's like a block underneath the tail block here, and there is the quick rip clamp right here, and there's another clamp at the end of the guitar, and so we're cantilevering this whole neck back. I'm pulling the shoulders back on the guitar while I'm gluing this to help hopefully also add a little bit of force it into the right shape kind of thing. And I can only imagine that it worked. I didn't do it the other way, so I don't know how. I can't quantify how much of a difference that made. But
did your perceived neck angle without string tension? Did you feel like that changed after you glued that in that rig like that?
So yeah, it went. I got more neck angle onto the guitar for sure. I did. It wasn't night and day.
Yeah.
Where you really notice is when you put string tension on and your action wasn't a mile high.
Yeah.
So basically, when the guitar is without rest, without string tension, it didn't change very much. It was just that it wasn't collapsing as much once you put string tension on it. Yeah, and it worked. It worked really well. I'm just gonna go forward here. Sorry, this is a terrible picture. I focused on the mirror, not the wood. But so look at this here. This is a modern guitar. It's this Waterloo guitar right here. It's a 2-year-old guitar, and you can see its saddle. That's how much saddle it had. And the action was like 8/64, and on the treble side. And so it needed a neck reset, but it also needed something else. So this guitar has this 1 3/8 wide brace right here, no popsicle brace, no finger braces. The top is 135 thick, so it's plenty thick, but there's just not enough going on here. And so it's a strange guitar. It's strange for the guys at Collings who are so meticulous about everything in the world to underbrace a guitar like this. It's very bizarre. Other Waterloo models have a popsicle brace and have finger braces. Sound hole braces. So I don't know what they were thinking with this guitar. Maybe it was made on a Friday. I'm not sure. But beyond needing a neck reset, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a popsicle in here, and I'm going to put sound hole braces, and it's just going to have to be that way if you want to have a guitar that's not going to fall apart. I've been in touch with Collings about it. I've sent them pictures. I've not yet heard back from them if this was actually for a short while the way they were making these guitars, or if somebody that was working there wasn't happy with their job or something and sabotage the guitar. I don't really know, because I don't have another Waterloo WL12 to look at. I have looked at other Waterloo models, and they all do have a second brace here and sound hole braces, so it's a mystery.
It can happen. It
can totally happen. Yeah.
I wanted to also ask you, I think I heard you talk a little bit. I've never heard anybody else talk about this, but did you mess around with doing some compression fretting on the fingerboard extension to modify the neck angle a little bit?
So that's a biggie. That's a really good trick. It works a lot on bar fretted guitars. Yeah. If you're resetting the neck on a bar fretted guitar and you miss your neck angle or something, you can do tons with the fret tang width in this part of the neck right here. If you have not set your angle enough, you can replace these frets here with much tighter fitting frets. If you're doing a T fret guitar, you'll have to get some of that, the widest T fret wire that you can have, which at this point is around 24.5 thou. You can't get Martin's old 27 thou wire anymore, which is too bad. On a bar fretted guitar, you could put a wide bar fret in there and really just really change the neck angle by your fretwork up there. It's a great little trick. If you're ever stuck, you underset a neck by accident, you have to fix it without taking the whole neck apart.
Do you not get much past the fingerboard extension? I always felt like there must be some rigidity, some torque negation that happens by having those. I used to kind of pull my hair out when guys would talk about loosening up the fingerboard extension frets to make it easier to fret up there. I'd just be like, oh my God, there's so much rigidity up there. But do you think that's the case, or maybe not? Or
it's a happy medium. Excuse me one sec, I'll grab a neck.
Yep.
I don't know, is this one doing it? A little bit. So here's this neck is from a late 20s Martin. And you can see
the cup.
I don't know if you can see this. This is working at all.
It's cupped a little bit. Yeah.
It's cupped down. So the bar frets are wedging the fretboard here and bending the whole fretboard down. Right. So there's a happy medium where you're adding structural integrity to the whole thing with those frets, but not cupping down. And if they're too tight up here, you get that down cup thing happening, which is going to exacerbate that problem because it's pushing down on those face braces, right? So, yeah, you could do damage by over compressing up here for sure. I just like them tight. I don't like them loose up here, but I don't want to have to force them. That's sort of what I feel is the right way to go with
Cool.
frets in that. Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little more about the move that you made with the popsicle brace and kind of going against the kind of where the market is at in terms of adding things to guitars. Like, it does seem like the market is unbelievably short-sighted in terms of what these guitars are going to kind of live like with kind of doing what I feel is like half measures for financial stability at this point. But do you have anything to say about that, or like any ideas how you say about that?
I mean, I think our job as guitar repair people is to make a guitar work well, play well, and sound its best, right? And maintaining its value is a very important part of what we do at every step, but it shouldn't be the first consideration on a lot of guitars. If a guitar is just a collectible, one-off interesting instrument that no one's ever going to play anyways, but it's a cool thing, sure, whatever. But who wants to spend 90 grand on an advanced jumbo for it not to be playable? Like, it just doesn't make any sense, right? So if this guitar needs a brace put in, I'm going to put the brace in. I haven't modified the guitar. I've glued a brace in sensitively using hide glue. I could take that brace out in 1 hour and leave no trace that it was ever there. So I'm not going to epoxy that brace in, I'm not going to drill holes in the guitar needlessly, but I'm going to take every liberty I want to make this guitar actually work properly. And I think that's our job. And I think we have to actually open our mouths and say, I know your guitar costs a lot of money and I know it's really pretty, but you brought it here because I'm the expert. And this is what I got to tell you. It needs this to work, period. There's not too many people driving Model T Fords around with original rubber on them, right? Nobody has a vintage Corvette with original tires on it and actually drives the thing. Like, what's the point? So make these things work. I feel that way about frets. I feel that way about saddles. But that doesn't mean it's like all out war on the guitar. Like, I'm not going to go thinning the top on a vintage Gibson because I think the top is too thick for it to sound good. That's just the guitar. But if I can make a change that's reversible and sensitive, sure, absolutely. And we should all feel that way. Just know the limits and don't go epoxying stuff into guitars needlessly, and don't go drilling holes and sanding where you shouldn't be sanding, et cetera, et cetera. But it's our job to make these things work, and it's our job to inform the less informed internet savvy people that we service that what they have garnered from whatever forum on the internet might actually not be the truth.
Yeah. Do you spend much time on forums? I'm guessing probably not.
Yeah, at a certain point I used to, but it's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
To police that stuff and to come out and say, no, you're wrong, actually. But at places like that Fretboard Summit, it's a good place to do it. It's a good place to teach people, and slowly but surely, change will happen.
Can you talk a little bit about like, you probably see a lot of bridge plates in Gibsons that are, were non-functioning on the day that they were born. But can you talk a little bit, bridge plates is one of those ones where I feel like is a real highlight of where people kind of like dance the dance in the wrong way and maybe preserve bridge plates to the detriment, of the future of the guitar. Do you have any good guidelines on when they come out and when you pull them and put stuff, new good stuff in, or when you're just like...
I have guidelines for that for sure. First off, Martin bridge plates from before about 1950 were tucked under X braces, and they are a pain in the butt to get out nicely, and they are difficult to get out safely, and they're more difficult to replace cleanly. And I think, and because of the value of those guitars, it makes a lot of sense to try hard to leave a pre-50s Martin bridge plate in place. There are many ways to fix a bridge plate that is either cupped or damaged, and I'll make every effort to repair a bridge plate rather than replace it in a Martin guitar from before 1950. I make every effort to leave a bridge plate intact all the time at this point, because the bridge and the bridge plate are essentially the heart of the instrument, and you're going to change something for the better or for the worse, but your sound is going to change if you mess with the bridge plate. So I only do bridge plate work when I have to, but there are certain old bridge plates that deserve to be taken out and replaced. In my books, anytime you have one of those dumb 50s Gibson bridge plates where the back is blown out because they misplaced the bridge plate, or if you have one where somebody has altered it to the point of no repair, of course you have to take that out. But Gibsons and Martins, really, you can look at very differently. Martin never got the position of their bridge plate wrong. They never used crappy wood. They were good from the outset. So if you're the first person at a Martin bridge plate, even from after the 1950s, it's good to do everything you can to fix it in place. And whether that's using like the Thompson belly reducer kind of idea, or filling the holes in with, CA and maple dust. You just don't want to sand a lot of it off after you do that maple dust and super glue trick, because you don't want to thin the bridge plate out, obviously. But the world is allergic to those caps that we stick over bridge plates. That's another sort of dumb thing that would be nice to go away. I think if you do a repair on your bridge plate, particularly if it's a cracked bridge plate, and you put a very small maple cap over it that's 50 thou thick and just the size that it needs to be, it's not hurting a thing. And it's probably making your guitar sound better. So I've got no problems with those if they're done properly. Conversely, I'm just going to get another prop. Hang tight, everybody. Most of my stuff is at the shop. I only have a few things here. If you've got one of these in your guitar, like, I have no problem taking these out of guitars. I should have a problem. It's not cool that I'm so blasé about taking these stupid, huge plywood bridge plates out of Gibsons, but they're dumb. And, maybe I'll go down on the wrong side of history, but I really don't mind if people remove these bridge plates. But they're not all terrible. If you look at here, so this thing, you can see where the holes were.
Yeah, the holes were on the back end.
Yeah, so when this plate came out, the new plate was the same size as this plate and the same thickness, but it was just positioned down a 1/4 inch, so the holes would be where they were. I made it out of good maple and stuck it in there, and that looks great. Here's another one. So 1962 J50. So until late 62, Gibson did single ply maple bridge plates. So those early adjustable bridge guitars have these little bridge plates. It wasn't until, well, there's a size in between these two. 1963, they had something in between these two sizes that was made out of this thick plywood. But it was more around this size, maybe just a little bit longer. And then by 65, they went to these things. I think it's perfectly fair to remove these broken bridge plates and replace them. But an adjustable bridge that has this kind of bridge plate and it actually works, like it's not all torn apart, it should definitely be left. Like that's a good little small bridge plate in an original guitar. But there's like silly things, like check this out. This is a Kel Croydon 9641 from 1930. That's how thin the bridge plate is.
Wow.
There's your 1961, right? This is 40 thousandths. Like there's nothing to it, right? So it was not salvageable. It was doing nothing at all. So it came out nicely. Any wood that's this thin, you just have to put a wet sponge on it for an hour and it'll come right out, right? There's nothing to it. So I didn't want to change this guitar. So I made a new bridge plate that was, instead of 40 thou, I made it 50 thou, and I stuck it in there so that I wouldn't change the sound of that guitar. But this one wasn't doing anything, and there was no reason for it to be there. It's arguable if it's doing anything anyways at this thickness, but it was really doing nothing at this thickness. So yeah, so it's not uncommon for this. On a pre-war Gibson, on a 30s Gibson that has a destroyed cracked bridge plate, they're really easy to get out, and they're really easy to make new ones of, and they're really easy to put them in with hide glue. And so if I'm making an exact replica bridge plate with really good maple and I'm hide gluing it in, I have no problem doing that. Gibson never tucked their braces. The bridge plates were often not even anywhere close to their X brace arms. So, there's lots of improvements you can make to a guitar structural integrity. And again, I'm not saying, go remove bridge plates in every old Gibson you come by, but there's a time and a place. And on a Gibson, that time and place happen much more frequently than on a Martin.
Yeah. So is on Martins, how would you approach a cracked bridge plate that was like cracked from E to E pins? Like, is that a case for pulling it?
Yeah, it would depend on the guitar, really. Like if this is like a 60s D18 with a cracked bridge plate, take it out and put a proper one in there. I got no problem with that. If it's a 30s guitar with a cracked bridge plate, it's a whole other thing, because you do have to conceptualize that. You have to add to your decision making the value of the guitar and the desires of the owner. And so that's a conversation to have with the owner. In my books, I don't want to take that plate out because, again, it's lapped over, like it's over, the X brace is over top of it. So I want to avoid that. If I think I can salvage it by gluing it and putting a maple cap over top of it, I would rather that and an original bridge plate on a 30s Martin anything than a replaced bridge plate.
Yeah.
I just think that old bridge plate is a big part of that sound, and how it is lapped is very critical. One thing that we should just segue on for a second, when you're regluing a top, let me grab one. Not regluing a top, when you're regluing a bridge, and the X brace is here and here, even if you haven't used heat to get that bridge off, a good assumption to make is that, hey, the X brace is loose here and here. Just assume it is, because I guarantee you, even if you don't notice that it's loose, it's probably loose. The same thing with those cracks up here. You might not see that it's loose, and your feeler gauge might not even notice that it's loose, but try to get some glue in there, because more often than not, they are loose, particularly if you've used heat to remove a bridge. You can just assume that that's going to happen. A lot of guitars that I worked on before I had that realization, so guitars I worked on like in 2004 would come into the store, and I remember the person, the guitar, and the work, and it all looks good, but it's got all kinds of top deflection now, and I look inside, and sure enough, the top is separated from the X brace. Why? It's because I didn't think that, oh, the heat that I've used in taking this bridge off has compromised the X-brace glue joint. You just got to assume it's doing that and preemptively fix it in whatever way that you want to. And that's particularly true when you're dealing with those pre-1950 Martins, where half of the width of the X-brace is removed for the bridge plate to lap underneath it. There's almost no contact area there for the X-brace against the top. And if it, you gotta just preemptively fix that, because you're gonna hurt things.
Yeah, the X-brace letting go is I think is a bigger deal than a lot of people realize. Like it's kind of off to the races with the loose X-brace, it seems like.
Oh yeah, there's it's rare that one does not have a loose X-brace, and you really get one chance to fix it right. If on a guitar built before 64, you really have to use high glue to do it.
Yeah.
If you go putting PVA in a vintage guitar X-brace joint, you're just screwing things up for the next guy, because it's gonna let go, and then you're toast. You can't fix it. At least with high glue, if it lets go, you could fix it. You can do it again. So that's why we love the high glue thing. One other thing about bridge plates and X-braces and all that sort of thing. Once upon a time, it was de rigueur to remove the bridge plates on 70s Martins, big rosewood bridge plates. And I did lots of that 20 years ago. And the guitar sounded way better without them, I have to admit. Like, it makes a big difference. They sound great. However, I didn't own a guitar top thickness gauge when I was doing that. I didn't own a Hackling or a Magic Probe or one of those sort of things. And had I owned one, I think I would have informed myself quicker that in the process of putting those big bridge plates in a Martin guitar, Martin simultaneously made the tops thinner than what they were at. So if a mid-60s D28 top averaged 120 thousandths of an inch thick, a mid-70s D28 top with that bridge plate might average 105 thick. They made the tops thinner because they were reinforcing the area of the bridge plate, and to keep the Martin tone alive, they changed their spec on the top thickness. And so we go and we take those bridge plates out and we put a small little maple bridge plate in there. But then what happens frequently is that the top doesn't have enough strength in this area and the whole thing deflects. Particularly so if you didn't notice the loose X-braces and you let those fly too. So I don't take 70s bridge plates out any longer just because I see them as a whole system now.
I think it was like a 68 came in, and I talked a big game about revolutionizing the guy's tone, and oh my God, it took me all day to get that rosewood bridge plate out, and then I got the maple one in there, and it did sound better, but it was not, in my experience, I didn't get to hand it back to him and go, ta-da, like it's tough when you make big claims about tone change. So I don't know, like I would just stay away from telling anybody the other one was adjustable bridge. I talked a big game about changing the bridge to a bone saddle, and I think I made it sound worse. I think it sounded better with the dumb adjustable bridge.
I mean, I have so many old Gibson bridges in a pile at the store. I changed so many of those things out from adjustables.
Yeah.
And there are certainly guitars which I think it's no problem. Again, much of Gibson's production from 1965 on, I have no problem changing those to a drop-in saddle bridge. There's very little that's special about a J45 from 60. But those early adjustables with the thin maple bridge plates and the ceramic inserts from 57 to 62, some of those are very magical in their tone.
Yeah.
And they have this really cool lo-fi sub bass thing that makes for just a beautiful strummer of a guitar. No, you're not flat picking on the thing, but the strumming sound is so good. And you put a normal drop-in bridge in that thing, and all of a sudden it's just a guitar at that point. It lost a lot of magic. So you gotta be careful about that one.
Nate Wood has a question about that, but I also wanted to get your take on kind of reflexively thinking that X-brace is going to make an improvement. You know, like there's a lot of guys pulling out old ladder brace guitars and throwing X braces, and I think it's probably a case to be made for that. But the ladder brace guitars, in my estimation, kind of have some charm to them as is. I don't know. Do you have a take on that kind of trend?
I think a good ladder brace guitar is a great ladder brace guitar. It's a great guitar, ladder brace or X brace. And there are a lot of guitars that are needlessly getting converted to X bracing. There are a pile of terrible ladder brace guitars in the world too.
Yeah.
And I've converted a bunch, and in all honesty, it's super fun to do. It's super gratifying to do all that on an old Harmony or a K or something like that. But yeah, there's a lot of great sounding ladder brace guitars, and I think with Waterloo coming on scene and reissuing ladder brace guitars and selling them for $2,500, it's really opened our eyes to the tone of a ladder brace guitar and how awesome it can be. And so, yeah, I don't think that we should go wholesale destructo on Waterloo on ladder brace guitars at all. I think that we have to appreciate them for what they are. And if a guitar is a terrible guitar, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
But maybe get a few opinions on that before you go popping those braces out.
Yeah. Nate, did you have a question? You got your hand up.
Yeah.
And a hand on the guitar.
Yeah. So I wanted to, if we could go back to the loose X brace and also frequently finger brace things when a bridge has come off. And we're talking about if you can fix that in the moment there, then you're better off, even if you can't detect that it's loose at the time. And also the using hide glue in that situation. If you were to try to deliver the glue in that moment, what do you ever feel comfortable using those like Old Brown or whatever, like the pre-constituted longer open time sort of?
No, I normal hide glue doesn't freak me out, so I've never felt the need to use that Old Brown glue or fish glue. I might think about using those like when I was like gluing a top to the sides, because that you need a lot of work time for. Yeah. It's a lot of work to do that well with hide glue, but no, I just like, I'll show you what I use. 1 second.
Yeah, I feel like if I have one struggle that's the largest for me, it's always figuring out how the hell I'm going to get the glue in the thing inside the guitar.
Right. Well, I'm gonna show you a few things. So I'll grab the next one. So I use a lot of these. Just regular hypodermic needles. But what I'll often do on places where I can't easily get in there with enough time, and it's just, or it's too big a thing, or it's too far back in the guitar and I can't actually squash this in, is I'll use where is it? I'll use it like an extension tube. And yeah, these are genius. And I'll take this needle off. I'll put the extension tube in here.
That's actually a medical grade extension tube, correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then I'll attach my needle on this end. And then you have to be careful with how you load it, because like a brake line on a car, you don't want to have air bubbles in this line, right? Because it gets all mushy and you got no control. So you have to load this up with high glue, and you'll need a lot of high glue. And usually a larger syringe helps, because you'll put 5 milliliters of high glue into this line, right? So you need to go to a 10 mil syringe when you're doing it. But that way I can position this where I want it to be, take my hand out of the guitar and squash the high glue and looking at it with a mirror to see where the glue's coming out. And then it's a pain in the butt, because then you got to take this thing out and you got to rinse it, because you want to use it again, because you don't want to have to go having a million of these things around. So every time I do this, I stop and then I flush this with water, and it's a lot of work. So I often just go with this. But yeah, this is just medical grade extension tubing. I don't even know what it's called. Again, that guy who does x-rays for me, who's a vet surgeon, hooks me up with all this fun stuff. So
nice.
It's good to make some friends. The other thing I'll do, let me see if I have a guitar that has it in there. I'm gonna get you guys to hang tight one more second.
We're hanging.
I'm looking for a prop.
How does one put a hand up? I don't get that.
Reaction.
Say that again.
Yeah, like Nate, you put a hand up like, hey, I have a question.
I
How
think
does one do that?
you can, I believe that you can do it in the chat, maybe.
It's in the reactions thing on my phone. There's like
Oh yeah, reactions. You can also, I think if you put your hand up, like sometimes it'll like notice that your hand is up and then give you a hand.
Does it automatically do that? Really?
Sometimes, yeah. It'll do it with like the thumbs up sometimes too. It'll throw a thumbs up in the thing. It's not doing it now. I probably broke it.
Nate, do it again. That was awesome. Do it again.
Love it. All right, so here's the other thing. This is, I don't know if I should show you this. This is a little alt. I don't know if this is acceptable to the world at large. I think that there's no problem with this. The way I do this, I'm letting you all know, and you could tell me if I'm crazy. But so here's a guitar that had loose X braces. Grab a pointer here. So what I've done on this one to access it, I'll get this really close. So you can see I've mapped out where the X brace happens with little pencil marks on the bridge area. And I've taken a little tiny pin vise with like a 15 thou drill bit, and I've drilled 3 tiny holes through the guitar at the X brace.
Yeah.
And I inject glue, and then I watch it come out on the inside, and then I clamp it, and I don't have to at the guitar.
I'll go ahead and register that as a decent technique.
Yeah.
I think I've been doing this for a couple of years, and people are like, "Oh, you're drilling holes in a guitar." This is why I don't tell people I do it. I don't think it matters at all. There's a lot of holes in the guitar that don't matter. So 3 tiny little holes that fill up with high glue, who cares?
I think you're good.
As long as you mark where those bridge plates are. I just use magnets inside and outside, and I mark where they are. Done.
Can we back up to the loosening the X brace with your bridge removal? Have you changed how you remove bridges with that information, or do you just kind of like go about? I mean, you got to use heat. I mean,
sometimes you have to use heat, other times you don't. It depends on the guitar.
Wait a second. Are you doing the Don Teeter shocking the bridge off with?
No, but
Okay.
But if the bridge is already loose and it's very obvious which way the grain orientation is, it's very easy to, and it's a high glue bridge. Can't do this with Type On. If it's a high glue bridge on a top with good run out definition, it's very easy to take it out without heat. This is super easy. You just have to go this way and that way, and you listen for the crack of the high glue, and it comes off super clean. It like super clean. And you never do that on a guitar that has yellow glue bridges, PVA bridges. I always heat those off. And I always use heat when the run out isn't extreme. If you have a top that doesn't have very much run out, I'm going to use heat on it because I don't trust going in. But it works great. Yeah, but you just, you have to do it enough, and you have to know how to read grain.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to not force it. As soon as you force things, you ruin them. But
well, that's the truth.
Yeah,
I think if we're gonna make a bumper sticker based on anything you've said today, that's gonna be it.
Yeah, don't force.
Don't force it, or you ruin it.
No, every time I've damaged a guitar, it's when I was not patient and I forced something.
Yeah,
and so I have little reminders. On my bench, I have like this one time there was some guy put in a sound hole brace that was just disgusting, like right at the sound hole where there were cracks coming down the fretboard, and they put this hideous, ugly brace, and it was visible from the outside of the guitar, like it overhung the sound hole. It was terrible, and I was just like, oh, I gotta get this thing out, and I just like went at it. And of course I screwed the guitar up. And so I got that piece out finally, and I wrote the word reminder on it, and I stuck it onto my bench, like front and center, so that I never do dumb shit like that again. You know, it's important, but we're all human. We're all gonna want to get something done every now and then.
Yeah.
But don't, yeah.
Just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Should I open it up for a couple more questions? We got some people that I'm sure dying to get a crack at a question here. Anybody? Bo Hanna, the distinguished gentleman from the great state of Colorado, floor recognizes.
Hello, Mark. Thanks for the talk.
Sure.
The cracks that go along, not the fingerboard extension itself, but the head block, right along it, how best to cleat that and deal with that? I found it to be pretty tricky. Or, yeah, I've always sort of crossed my fingers when I give it back to the customer.
I always do a brace that spans across. I'll do a brace that spans that wide.
So you don't go on the sides of the head block, just the front of it.
What for? You're not doing anything. Like if you join a cleat to a crack, like that's not helping a thing. It's just gonna get in the way of the next guy. So no, I'll just put a, that size thing. I don't go long like I did on that advanced jumbo. I only did that for the structural, for the arching of the top. But if I'm fixing cracks along here, I'll go an inch on either side, one long thing across it.
And sort of along the same lines, do you add that brace structurally to butt up against the upper transverse brace and the head block, so it acts as sort of a rigid brace in between, a bit like modern builders are building head block extensions?
I've never tried to, sure, you can do that. It would be stronger. It will be harder to get out if you have to get it out if you're butted against everything. But on a vintage guitar, those surfaces are never parallel, and I'm trying to actually make a profit, so I don't I don't try to fit it in there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Joe Golden.
As a note, there's Brian Kimsey in New Mexico does a lot of work on Martins, and he uses a little trapezoidal flat brace, and he wedges it between the transverse brace and the end of the guitar. But it starts out the same width as the neck, and then it widens out, so it covers those cracks that go alongside the neck. By the time it gets to the transverse brace.
Isn't that the guy who takes out popsicle braces? Was that his whole deal?
Well, no, he does it if that's what the customer wants. But if his contention is the popsicle brace, he doesn't arbitrarily do it. His contention is that his experience is it doesn't really prevent those cracks from happening.
It doesn't.
Or that whole
cracks. No.
From his experience.
Yeah, I agree
but
there.
If that is happening, where that whole collapse thing, the rotation of the end block is helping the thing cave in and getting those cracks where the whole sound hole is shifting.
Yeah.
Then what he'll do is he'll remove the popsicle brace and replace it with his little trapezoidal flat brace, but he does wedge it between the transverse brace and the body of the guitar.
Yeah.
I mean, he gets everything shifted back into position before he does that, but that's the way he does it.
It sounds like a perfectly viable solution as long as you're not doing that on a valuable vintage guitar. Can I go to show you something? I'm going to share screen for a quick sec here. Back to this thing. So here is a Hags from 12 string with the world's most stupid neck joint system. And of course, this thing just torques dramatically. This block, you can see the end of it here. There's like 3/8 of an inch where it's in contact with the top here and here. And so the only thing holding this guitar, like this thing cracked. You can see there's plywood in here now, but there was mahogany and it cracked. And this whole thing shifted and the sides bent forward. And so I rebuilt this whole thing. It was a fun project for a guy who actually spent too much money on this guitar, but the block, I replaced these things here, and then I made this ridiculously huge brace to do exactly what you're talking about there. It's glued to the top and it's glued to the block, and its whole job, and that's why it's plywood down here. I just didn't want it to break across here and here. It was to stop it from torquing, exactly what you're telling me that Kimsey does on his thing. And this is a piece of crap Hagstrom 12 string that is not worth the wood that it's made out of. So I was perfectly fine to put in this huge piece of wood, because I know I'm not hurting the sound of this thing. I'm probably only making it better, but I don't know if I would do that on a 30s Gibson, you know. So, but yeah, you got to stop that rotation from happening somehow or another.
Joe Golden, do you
In
want to?
actuality, Kimsey now he's mostly specializing in fixing the problems from the 70s
Right.
Martins. So that's a whole different story. But since this is about popsicle braces, I thought I'd interject what I understand his philosophy on that is.
Yeah,
And that joint you just showed me, that neck joint looks almost exactly like the neck on my baby Taylor that got crushed, and I had to repair that whole area.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
Joe Golden, are you ready to ask that question?
I am. Mark, I'm really enjoying what you have been saying today. Thank you. I too have stopped doing bridge plate repairs or removals on 70s Martins. So I particularly enjoyed that part. I just have a quick question about have you, or I have a 53 Southern Jumbo in my shop right now, and the bridge plate is in good shape. It's everything seems oversized. In that particular situation, have you ever used like the Waverly oversized pins, or would you go in, like what would be your approach to maybe some pin sizing that's a little bit on the larger side?
So those Waverly oversized pins are huge.
They
They're
are.
like
I got them. They are
telephone poles.
huge. I didn't use them.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I would so sometimes, so I'll fill the holes in the bridge plate, CA dust and super glue, but sometimes I'll even do that inside the bridge. I'll use rosewood dust and CA and just sort of layer and layer and layer and layer, and then go and ream it out so that you can use a finer pin in there. But you got it. The trick is to let that super glue harden up a lot before you start reaming it. Like you got to give it a week, particularly if it's in any.
Okay.
Yeah, because we all think super glue hardens right away, but it doesn't. It takes some time to harden. And I've had good luck with that because I'm allergic to those super oversized Waverly pins. I want to use the smallest pin I can use.
I had no idea. I ordered a set and I put them in. I'm like, oh my goodness, they're like logs. So
is the point of those to try to give you something to do when you have wallered out holes? Is that the point of those, or?
Yeah, it's just a huge bridge pin so that you can, repair a hole that's been oversized. But they're too big. They're beyond.
They're too big. They're too big.
Well, I mean,
too big.
Like sometimes you can get away with that if you've got like a slotted bridge pin scenario and the ball end has gone up the hole. You can just convert it to slotless. But I've never heard it going big to.
They go big because people screw with things and they get it wrong, right? Like that guitar around for 70 years, someone screwed with it and they made the holes huge. So now you got to fix it. But there are a lot of different bridge pins out there. Like those Hankies pins come in lots of different shapes and sizes.
Mm-hmm.
And don't buy the slotted ones of those. Get the unslotted because they slot terribly. Like their slots on them are terrible. If you have to slot a Hankies, do it yourself. But those Waverly ones I think they're another StewMac product that should not exist. That's just they're just really silly huge.
Yeah. How do you slot your own bridge pins? Do you have a milling machine there, or?
No, I'm low tech. I'm super low tech.
Saw, hammer and tong.
I put a little. I just have a ball and Dremel mill. Where is it? Where? Well, I don't know where it is. Maybe it's in the drill press. But like something. Imagine this, but bigger. And I just mount this in my drill press at 3,000 RPM, and I have a little jig that the pin goes in, and I just like feed it through. I use my drill press like a milling machine because I don't have a milling machine, and it works just fine. It's great.
Cool.
Works beautifully. And then you have a nice rounded shape, and you can go whatever depth you want. I'll often give people when I'm installing pins in a vintage guitar, particularly in a here, like in a 30s, here's a 30s bridge where you've got like no room here, that the person wants to have like unslotted pins. Well, you can't, because you'll have no break angle. You'll have like this crazy extreme break angle if you put a slot in this bridge, right? And so what I'll do is I'll just change the size of the slots in the pins for each string, which is a little extreme, but it's a good end result. You know, you can easily do that if you have a milling machine or a drill press.
Yeah,
for sure.
Good tip. Tyler Geske?
Yeah, Mark, how's it going, man?
Good. How you doing?
So kind of going back to the cracks along the fretboard edges, I've had a couple recently that I've fixed. It always seems to be old L00s, but really severe ones that crack all the way through to the sound hole. And, you know, I can kind of torque the shoulders back to get that crack realigned, glue it, and everything's fine. But I can never seem to get those plastic rosette rings to look factory. They like almost permanently deform. Do you have any tricks on how to make that look a little bit better?
I have tricks to get it better, but I have no tricks to make it look like it never happened. The only way to make it look like it never happened is to replace it or to shift the rosette or something to that effect, because once it's bent, it's bent. I've seen, there's a lot of, the expression I would use is trompe l'oeil, like you just make it look right. You get it really close, and then you might get in there with a black marker and fake it, right? However, to get it really close, because you can get it much closer than just yanking the neck in place. I'll show you my favorite tool for a lot of things in the shop. Is this.
Aha.
So you heat it up as you're pulling it, and the plastic just gets softer, and it just like relaxes into the shape that it needs to be. The plastic will, it has a memory, like wood has a memory too. Like when you're bending a side and it boings back, plastic does the same thing. So you don't want to use a heat gun because those destroy finishes, but you can't destroy a finish with well, you can if you're a total idiot, but you can't really destroy things with a hair dryer. So it works really well for plastic rosette straightening. I use it for bending plastic all the time. It's a great trick. So between that and like drawing on your lines and trying to fake it, and then set your expectations, you can't get it perfect. And take that weight off your shoulders.
That's a good tip. No one to say when.
There's nobody showing it to you on Instagram that hasn't screwed with it. Okay, it's just not possible. So maybe it is possible if it wasn't terrible at the outset. I should show you. Can I share the screen for a second again here, guys?
Yeah.
Let me go back to photos, and then I'm going to go back to here. This one. Nope, that's not it. I don't have an after. Again, I have no after pick. I wanted to show you guys this one because it was my biggest success yet. It wasn't perfect, but like if you zoomed in, you would see it. But it was exactly what I just told you about heat and fake and finish. And the guy paid a lot of money for me to do it. So yeah, it's not easy. And so just make sure you take that expectation off of yourself because you'll drive yourself crazy.
Eb Stewart, I'm assuming has a question about beard maintenance. Oh, he's gone. Dave Stouty. I don't know if you saw he's got a giant beard.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going, Dave?
Are you friends with Jeff Malia down in Australia?
No, I don't know that person.
No, he's a friend of mine. He's done some amazing Martin stuff. Back to your he's like the TJ Thompson of Australia. And I asked him what was new last time I talked to him, and he had told me some, like, around the turn of the century Martins, that he was avoiding neck resets from what you were talking about. But this area had just gotten flat. So he was popping the finger brace loose, using denatured alcohol on really old hide glue. I guess it'll sometimes crack it loose. Yeah. And then putting a new arch in this area.
Yeah.
Tucking an arch brace under that brace, or replacing the whole thing completely.
Yeah.
And that was giving them just enough to avoid taking the whole neck off.
That's right.
The guitar was so old and so much patina, not that he couldn't do it, but the problem was in here.
Yeah.
And it was a lot less surgery. So it just kind of reinforces how important this area that you were talking about.
Super important. And that's a great technique. I've done that on a number of Gibsons. I know TJ does that on 30s Martins with some regularity. They just had no clue what they were doing, right? And just because they did it doesn't mean it was right. And if you want your guitar to work, sometimes you got to pop out that upper sound hole brace and change the radius of the glue surface to fix things. And as long as you do it in a sensitive way, sure, right? On a hide glue guitar, man, they're so easy to do that stuff to. You can get those out, put them back in more often than not, looking really good. It's challenging at the linings, right? Where it's like under a lining. But there are ways around that too. But absolutely, that should be a trick in your bag when necessary.
At least in your diagnosis.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Did we see Elaine's question in the chat?
I don't think we did. Hold on one second. I was kind of let's see here. Do you ever use Stutman Bridge Saver? Probably ought not talk about that one.
Well, Dan Erlowine's name is here. I don't want to badmouth that tool.
I think it has its place. I don't cleat much, but I'll tell you what, it makes the thing that makes the round things, those are dynamite cleats. Like you just need a small cleat.
I'll tell you something. So no, I don't use that tool. I don't like that tool. I've seen too many destroyed bridge plates as those little plugs pop out. And I also just don't like the irreversibility of what they do to a bridge plate. You want to do that to your Takamine, knock yourself out. But I don't want to use that tool on a vintage guitar. Particularly on a vintage guitar with a bridge plate that is thinner than 100,000ths of an inch. So when you use that tool, you bite into the underside of the top of the guitar, which is permanent, irreversible damage. But on some 80s guitar that needs a fix, if you like it, sure, just make sure you use a good piece of wood and so the grain doesn't pop out of those plugs. But I will can I just segue from that? That made me think about something I would love to share about cleating, because I almost never cleat cracks, and I also don't usually get guitars wet to fix a crack. A lot of people will humidify a guitar so the crack closes and then glue the crack and cleat it. But what I've seen is that every time I've fixed so many guitars that have had cracks cleated and the cleats are in there, but the crack is wide open. A cleat doesn't do anything to hold a crack closed. If it's dry, the crack's going to open and the cleat's not going to do anything about that. So I don't understand why we're so fixated on putting little tiny diamond cleats everywhere. It's so much work. And ultimately, I don't know what it's benefiting. I don't see it benefiting. If a crack doesn't close at shop humidity, my shop's 40%. If it's not closed at shop humidity, then I have to do something more extreme than just glue it and throw a cleat on there, or humidify it and throw a cleat. And I use TJ's cleat system for those ones, in which case the large surface area of his cleat and the action of the high glue will swell a crack closed, and the cleat locks it in place at the same time. It's the genius solution. You don't need it for any just regular crack. You need it for cracks that don't close. And for a crack that still doesn't close with a TJ cleat installed and you still have a Grand Canyon there, then I'll splice it or I'll infill it with colored stuff. And
you can say what that stuff is.
Oh, there's all kinds of stuff that you can use to infill it, but I've been experimenting with all kinds of different infill, glues and things that you can color and just make it look like wood. But if you use that TJ cleat and then you high glue it, it's closed as much as it can close. It's nice and level and flat. So if you are splicing, you have a flat thing to splice to. You don't have this sort of like weird volcano shaped thing that you have to splice to. But if you don't want to splice, then you wash out the high glue from the crack and open it back up again, and then you can infill the crack. But you have a base to it. You have a bottom. So your stuff's not just falling through the guitar, right? But if a crack is closed at shop humidity, like, because if it was an impact crack and you've lined it up, impact cracks don't need cleats unless there's all kinds of wood missing. You just glue them flat, you're done. And it makes your life so much easier when the next time that guy dries out his guitar or sits on it. You don't have to undo all the stuff that got in the way, right? I live in Canada. We're dealing with dryness cracks all the time. And so we'll just acclimate a guitar for 2 weeks before anything. A guy brings his guitar and we just hang it in the store. We don't do anything but hang it in the store. And after 2 weeks, we could know if this is Martin using wood that wasn't ready to be building a guitar with, or if it was just simply dried out and now it's wet again. So I just want to urge people to not waste all your time making cleats. I mean, there's so many people that at least on Instagram, you'll show off these beautiful cleats that they made with their super sharp chisels. And it's like, great, but what for? Is this an exercise in making beautiful little things to stick in guitars, or is it an exercise in fixing a guitar? Because for me, it's an exercise in fixing guitars, and I don't want to have all those cleats in the way for the next time it breaks.
I've seen some, at least around here where it also gets dry, I see beautifully cleated guitars where the bottom is like still closed, and then it's basically done this thing and then protruded upwards. And thank you for talking to the over humidifying to close things. Boy, that just is
I've never had good luck doing that.
It doesn't just logically it doesn't seem to make much sense either. And especially like the idea of acclimating the guitar to a good humidity and just leaving it there rather than maybe trying to get it up to good humidity quickly, I think is also an important.
We'll do that.
Idea.
Like when some guy comes to us at the end of February and their guitar is a soup dish and there's like the back braces are concave, we'll forcefully humidify those guitars and we'll put clamps underneath the X brace X to help it out of its soup bowl thing. Like if a guitar is shaped like if the top is like this and it's below plane and you humidify it, oftentimes it'll just do this.
Yeah, let's just keep going. Right? Can I ask you?
Past vertical and then up again.
Do you ever see that? I've never seen that on a vintage Martin. I've only seen that on modern Martins. Does that have something to do with how they're getting wood through their cure process, or are they radiusing the braces the wrong way or something? I've never seen a guitar turn it into a satellite dish.
Yeah, new Martins turn into satellite dishes frequently, particularly the lower end ones. And I mean, Martin makes as many guitars in 1 year as they made for the first 100 years of their production, right?
Yeah,
seems like a lot. And they're not. It's just not. They're not being kiln. They're not being dried properly. Also, think about as a guitar builder in Canada, the vintage guitars that we find that have no cracks. If you look at serial numbers, your factory order numbers, and all that, you could cross-reference those guitars to having been built in the wintertime when those factories that didn't have humidity control were bone dry. When I was learning how to build guitars with Serge de Jong in the 90s, he made his shop 27% for us to glue our braces on. And you know what? That guitar never needs to be humidified, right? But a brand new D16 comes into the store a week after Martin ships it, and the whole top is sunken already. It's because the wood was green and it got shipped to.
I mean, I like to keep, that 45% that we were all raised on. Like, I always felt like that was too damp. Do you keep your shop for repair lower, or like, I like it? I mean, if I had it if I could manage it here in New Jersey, like 35, I think is probably the upper end of what I'd like. But do you have an opinion on?
Yeah, the lower the better, and the lower the safer. The problem is, if I was building guitars, my shop would be 32, 28, 35, like never wetter than 35. But because I'm repairing guitars and a guy brings his guitar in and I take the neck off and the guitar sits up there on a shelf for 4 months before I get to it, if my shop's 28% or 35% and that guitar was built in the summer, I'm going to be putting a crack into that guitar myself.
Yeah.
I can't have that. So I keep the shop, high 30s, 38 to 42, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be doing if I'm regluing a bridge or installing a brace or something, I will dry out the guitar on its own before I do that work to it. I'll use my hair dryer, I'll use heat lamps, I'll let it, I won't do that work in the summertime period. There's lots of work I just don't do in the summer because I just can't regulate the humidity in the shop well enough. So the winter, like a lot of builders, the winter is the busy season.
Yeah.
So
one more. Let's do one more question, then.
Oh, wait, can I just one more thing about the
yeah.
So the reason that Martin and Taylor both humidified their factories to 47% humidity is because they're building guitars for the world. And there's a lot more people in southern and central latitudes than there are in Canada, let's say, that are buying Martin guitars, right? There's many more people in Florida buying Martin guitars than there are in all of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to find a humidity where they are satisfying warranty concerns all over the world. And for them, that humidity point is 47%. As an independent builder, you don't have to do that. If you have an order from a guy who lives in Alaska, then you can build a guitar at 24% for that guy. And the next order that you have from a guy in Georgia, you can build a guitar at 48% for. But a factory doesn't have that luxury. And this is why we're dealing, why you and I in our northern latitudes are seeing so many of those soup dish guitars, because Martin's not building them for the northern latitudes.
Yeah. That's a good point. There are a whole host of problems with guitars on the other end of the humidity spectrum that nobody seems to want to recognize either. But Eb Stewart, you want to talk about beards, or what do you want to talk about?
Yes. I enjoyed, I hope I didn't miss this earlier, but the concept about these guitars that you're alluding to also is like, there's so many of the guitars that are so valued are from the golden age of American music and the golden age of guitar building. And so like a Yamaha or that Hagstrom or whatever, 50 or 100 years from now, no one will care about. So if you use epoxy and plywood in there, it's no crime. But I think it was that Bogdanovich interview where he talks about them and learning from the violin world. And they're much more light-handed on their repairs as far as the permanence of it, knowing that it's okay that it has to be done again, a few decades down the road, but that means the instrument's going to be around for another 100, 200 years, and I think pre-war Martins are going to, outlive our current civilization. But I'm just curious to your thought on that, because you were talking about, in particular, the invasiveness of that large cleats or braces for the slipping forward. But
yeah, I like to think a lot more like along the lines of the violin world, in that your repairs should be undoable and you can fix them again. But I guess I still have a lot of biases against things like those 12-string Hagstroms that were just garbage from the outset and are still garbage. And the violins that the violin world people are striving so hard to repair in such a way that they can be repaired over and over and over again were not garbage from the outset and are worth $1 million plus. And we have to be realistic. Even on this guitar that everybody in the world wants, it's still only worth like $8,000-9,000. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a certain point at which you cannot spend any more time on something because
Yeah.
there's no money in the equation to do it. So we have to cut certain corners where we can.
Sure.
And on a Hagstrom that's worth $200 and the guy's paying $1,500 to make it work right, I'm gonna have to do whatever I got to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was thinking about that about the braces too. Like 100 years from now, I think about someone like me in the future, and they open this guitar and they're like, "Oh man, look what somebody did," which happens in the violin world because of the different things. And I don't think people are going to be sad when they find, a B25 or a B15 that has X bracing in it. That you made it sound like what it was supposed to, as opposed to if somebody's really messed around with a Oriole, which is beautiful ladder braced guitar.
Problem is we don't have that crystal ball, and none of us have. We don't have.
The thing I'd say to that is like one of the things that's different between the violin world and what we're dealing with is the difference between factory built things and things that were built by individual makers and that were examples of cutting edge technology at the time. But that there are two things that drive value. One is scarcity, and as long as there's attrition from people, instruments leaving the market because yahoos get a hold of them and do weird shit to them, the number of B25s is shrinking every year because they're not valuable. And it may get down to the point where there's so few decent examples of them that the one that you work on may be valuable, and somebody may curse your beard in the future.
The whole lack of crystal ball thing, like maybe the next huge, pop idol will play LGO.
Yeah.
Right. And all of a sudden everybody will want an LGO. Look what happened with those 015 guitars, that Kenneth from the Milk Carton Kids played, or those crappy Epiphone arch tops, played by, Gillian Welsh and Dave Rawlings. And no one would have thought that those were valuable instruments at all, so we don't have that crystal ball. So we can't pretend that we know what's okay for the future. We have to treat them all with some modicum of respect.
A lot of that just comes down to like what Mark's talking about. There's a lot of things that you can do that are, as long as you're using hide glue, put a weird brace in there and see if it works. If it's easy enough to take it back out, I don't think there's any harm in that.
No.
So, you got a weird idea for getting the neck angle back, back where it needs to be without taking the neck back off for the third time, then I say have at it.
Yeah, but do it in a way that, is the best of your abilities and is well thought out, and get a second opinion if you think you need a second opinion. And do that bridge, that brace on that advanced jumbo without many, many, many days of thought and consulting people who I think are the top dogs in the biz about whether or not this was an okay idea, and the customer, of course, but like other repair people and vintage guitar dealers and collectors and all that. And then once I got them all on board, then I went and did it, because
do you how are you doing on time? We got two more questions. Joel Wilkins, who's mostly known for restoring Les Pauls and Blackguard Tellys, but Joel, do you have a question?
Hey, Joel.
I do. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good, man.
I do have a question, but it's kind of a shitty, drawn out,
Go for it.
Doesn't have a really good answer kind of question.
Right.
If we're talking about adding or replacing a bridge plate or a brace of some kind, theoretically we can demonstrate with enough effort that the brace is going to add some level of structural rigidity or something to a design that was under engineered, right?
Right.
So we can demonstrate it's an improvement in a certain case. and this is where the question gets kind of crappy. What do you suggest, or how do you deal with a customer in saying that, beyond my 30 years of experience of doing this, this is going to make it sound better, and what is better, and what is I get frustrated when there's not some level of objective, not data necessarily, but
yeah, I get it. Joel, you're in such a different end of the industry, like dealing on the electric guitar, the collectible electric guitar market is like the least tolerable of change and of modification of any kind whatsoever, right? And you're dealing with guitars that in certain cases have absolutely terrible design, like a double cut Les Paul Special, or an early Junior with a stupid, slug too close to the pickup, and that how to fix. But you got to modify things if you want it to work. What use is a Les Paul Special if the neck is flip-flopping because there's cracks in both sides of the pickup cavity? And you know very well how to fix that and are capable of doing it in such a way that you'll never even see it. But there's still a lot of people who don't want you to do that. I'll turn the question back on you. How do you deal with that? Because I think you deal with that way worse than most acoustic people would deal with that.
Well, I mean, I don't approach a structural repair unless it needs to be repaired, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that bridge post isn't cracking through the route to the pickup in that Junior, why touch it? I mean, it's going to have to be addressed someday, because it will crack someday, but that doesn't need to be me, and that doesn't need to be now. So I mean, it is what it is. But I don't know. I don't touch things unless they need to be touched.
Mark, can I just say, like, you've been in this for a long time. Do you think like the consumer of vintage guitars has changed? Like, I don't remember this baseball card. Like, it seemed to me to change right around 2007, where like the idea of guitar, like I remember coming up, guitars were like sailboats. Like these, the average consumer was just like, I'm just going to get screwed on this thing, but I want to, I want this guitar, and it seemed almost like a certain amount of stewardship was involved in owning it. And then somewhere when they became investments in baseball cards and shit like that, it's just like, it seems like we as the practitioners of this seem to lose control of the control of the dialogue here.
It's definitely a thing, and I mean, no, I'm really sorry, but nowhere is it worse than in a high value electric guitar. You're talking about baseball cards. It's a great analogy, like the slightest little tatter on an edge, and that card is worth a quarter of what it was actually worth. And it's just like that with electrics. We have work to do. I think that we're just kind of crazy. As a species, we're crazy. We want perfection in every way, and guitars are no different. And the internet has made us all super informed, and there are some very loud voices on the internet whom we all think is the next prophet. And, maybe that's inaccurate. And answer your question, Joel, I don't have a lot of filter built in, and I just tend to tell people what I think. And there are lots of people who think I'm a jerk and an arrogant SOB for being that way, and those people aren't my customers, and that's okay with me. So if I think something needs to be this way because that's the best course of action for an instrument, and that person is entrusting their instrument with me, I'm just going to tell them. And and I don't mind if I'm going to rustle some feathers, and if we're not a good fit because they don't like what I have to say about how I want to fix their instrument or the condition of their instrument, there are so many other people doing this job in the world that they can move on.
The other thing too that occurs to me, especially when you're dealing with like an $80,000 or $90,000 guitar, is there's so much liability for what you would think of as half measures. Like, nobody understands, the conversation that you had with a customer when they said, hey, I don't really feel like doing X, Y, and Z. Can you just do, W, and then you do W, and then it fails, even though you told the guy it might fail. And then, next thing you know, they're on the internet talking about it. So I
just don't let those people in.
Yeah.
If you're going to do my X, Y, and Z, you want me to shortcut this, or you want me to do it your way, I'm not your guy.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's
totally fine. There's so many people that will do this job, maybe better, maybe worse, maybe differently. But the way I want to do it is the way I want to do it. And I'm not willing to compromise the way I want to do it because you want me to. It's just not a good fit.
Well, I don't know if we answered your question, Joel, but I certainly got to go down some pet peeves of mine.
Yeah.
For a second.
I mean, I think it's probably an unanswerable question.
Yeah.
In some sense, but I do appreciate it, Mark. Thank you.
I wish I had more sort of, black and white to offer to you. But I just think of it like I go back to those Les Paul specials, that those 59 specials. I don't know how many people are familiar with them, but they Gibson routed for that neck P90 too close to the edge of the guitar, and there's like, I don't know, what is it, Joel? Like 3/8 of an inch worth of side.
That's even less. Yeah.
Even less. And those guitars all have cracks at the very end of the fretboard, and the neck basically hinges into your neck angle is completely unstable, and there is no way to fix it. There just isn't, aside from filling the freaking hole and moving the pickup. Like, it's just a terrible design. And those guitars are now worth $20,000 to $25,000 with that terrible design. And so last time I had one, I fixed it up with epoxy. I glued those, I heated everything up, and I thinned out some epoxy, and I put the guitar into compression, and I filled those cracks with this yellow epoxy that matched the yellow finish perfectly. And it fixed the cracks, and it fixed the neck angle. There was still a lot of flex, but it was no longer cracked. And then you sell the guitar like a hot potato. But
I actually came up with a reasonably good fix for one of those. It's on my page somewhere.
What is?
Carbon fiber.
Right.
Carbon fiber.
Yeah, carbon fiber. That's a good option too.
And it's well hidden, but it's a lot of work.
It's a shit ton of work, and even though that guitar is worth $20,000, it probably, even at that price, it almost doesn't pay.
Yeah.
You got to charge someone $5,000 to $10,000 for the work you're going to do on this.
Well, that's getting back to these guys need to get back into the sailboat mentality and owning these things. Like, you're just in it to, I don't know. Michael, do you know Michael? Do you know Mark?
Yeah, we've met one time. Joel's question made me think of something slightly more specific, going back to us being repair people, and sometimes you just got to make it work regardless of what the original design was, how it was built originally, design flaws. So how do you feel about spruce bridge plates, not just the Gibson monstrosities, but I see a lot of old parlors, and sometimes that, spruce, nice stiffness, but obviously it's so soft. It's rarely, and I've never seen one in a guitar and been like, oh, that thing's in great shape. Usually they're just trash.
Yeah.
Do you change those out, change the material?
It depends. It depends. Like if it's a huge spruce bridge plate, like in a ladder brace guitar that goes from end to end, or on an LGO kind of Gibson, I'll often just fix the holes, and then I'll put a maple cap over top of it. Because the spruce is perfectly fine. You just need to have the maple there so the ball ends don't eat into the spruce. And it's very thin little, again, like 40 thou, 50 thou maple cap is more than enough. And then you could leave that bridge plate intact. I have come across a number of spruce bridge plates in otherwise totally normal J45s from the late 40s, like 1947 in particular. Spruce bridge plates. So weird. Great sounding guitars.
Yeah.
But zero structural integrity. And so that one is more of a tricky thing. Do you take this original spruce bridge plate out and replace it with a normal maple one? Or do you repair it and plate it? And I've done both, and both are perfectly fine. And I leave that up to the customer. Because again, I can get that spruce bridge plate out without damage. It's very easy to get a spruce bridge plate out that's glued in with high glue. A little sponge overnight with water, like upside down on the guitar, and that bridge plate will just fall out the next day. Piece of cake. You just have to have patience. Don't go at it with a spatula or heater or something, because you'll damage it. And then they could put it back in if they want to put it back in, but I'll just put a maple one in there, same sizes. But they sound cool.
Cool. Well, we've been at it for 2 hours. Does it feel like 2 hours, Mark?
Not to me. It's what I do all day, every day.
Can we schedule a time to get you back maybe a few months from now? We'll
anytime
go
you
at
like.
it again, and maybe take a look at some more of those pictures. I want to see more pictures.
There's only about 70,000 pictures of guitars on this hard drive. So
you don't find it, like, I find it's bad luck. Like me and before pictures, it's like whenever I look at something, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna nail this one and take a before picture. I never struggle so hard with the guitar. I don't know if it's the expectations. Like I
think that there's a lot of that expectation for sure. Yeah, I don't know. And sometimes I don't take before pictures because I'm just assuming the end result is not going to be favorable enough for a photo.
Yeah.
And those are the ones you picture.
Those are the ones where you're like, son of a gun. Next time I get anything, I'll get it. Yeah. I'll get one that's close next time, and then we'll insert that. So, well, Mark, can everybody unmute and give Mark a good thank you for hanging out with us and going over some real tricky subjects.
Thank you, Mark.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks. It was a good talk.
And
come again.
Maybe we'll get you and TJ in tandem at some point in the future. I thought
he's comical. He's a funny guy, and I kind of enjoy being there with him.
I think you guys got a real good dynamic too. Like that was fun to watch. So
we're very, very, very different people. Yeah.
You might want to block out more time for that one.
Yeah.
The subject can
the Northwoods one was stunning. The bar fret talk was really something. But yeah, everybody, the Luth along is in full effect. And Mark, once again, thank you for hanging out with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. Lovely to meet all you guys. All right.
Thank you.